Okay, good evening. Thank you everybody for joining us. Hope you're having a great week. So we'll go over a little bit where we're up to in this week's Parsha, and we'll explain what's going on. So in last week's Parsha, we ended off with the Ten Commandments. That was the end of the Parsha, and we discussed this idea last week. By the way, if you could hear me, make sure to give a thumbs up, because we're trying a new audio system. So let us know if you could hear. Put a comment or put a thumbs up. Okay, so in this week's Parsha, after the giving of the Torah, we start to go through the actual laws of the Torah. So the first of the laws that we start with are the Mishpatim, are the civil laws of damages, laws of judgments, laws of monetary and financial judgments. And this is really the beginning of the laws of the Torah. So the Torah starts off, Ve'ela HaMishpatim. These are the laws, Asher Tasim Lefneim, that you shall put in front of them. So there's in the letters of the law of this words, Ve'ela HaMishpatim, Asher Tasim Lefneihem. The Baal HaTurim, as a commentary on the Torah, explains that these letters actually stand for something, as follows. He says Ve'ela, the letters Ve'ela stand for V'chayev Adam Lachkar Hadin, which means one is obligated to investigate the case. Okay. The next words he says, HaMishpatim, which means the laws, he says stands for Hadayin Mitzuvah Sheyasa Peshara Terem Yasa Mishpat, that a judge should try to make a compromise before making a ruling. Asher, he says, stands for Im Shneim Reitzim, if they both agree. And Tasim, you shall place, he says, stands for Tishma Shneim Yachad Medabrim, listen to both of them speak. Lifnehem, before them, he stands for Loi Pnei Nadiv Yahader Hisnaker Mehem. Do not favor the wealthy, pretend you don't know them. So we see here that it's kind of the basic ideas of justice and civil law in Judaism. Right? That you have to investigate, you have to have witnesses, the Torah goes through all these things. However, if we go to Tehillim, David HaMelech says, King David says, in chapter 72, L'shloimai elikim mishpatecha lemelech tein v'sidkascha leven melech. On Solomon, God, give your judgments to a king and your righteousness to a king's son. What does that mean? So the Midrashim and the commentaries explain that this was said about King David is saying about his King Solomon, and that give your judgments to the king means that you should essentially just, instead of having witnesses and testimony, that to make a judgment, you should give it to the king, and the King Solomon can make a judgment without any of those things, right? Like it says that it says in Devar Hayamim that it says Vayashav Shlomo al Kisei Hashem, that Shlomo, King Solomon, sat on God's throne. How is it possible a person could sit on God's throne? Rather, it means just like God could judge without any witnesses, right? God knows exactly what happened, without any warnings or anything like that. So too, King Solomon could judge the same way. And there's a story that accompanies this idea of King Solomon judging without witnesses, as follows. There were two women who lived in the same house, and they shared this house, and they both had babies within a few days of each other. And one night, one of the babies died. One of the babies got suffocated. So the mother went and switched the babies and said, your baby died and my baby lived. And became a whole argument. So they came to King Solomon. So they started arguing, this is my baby, no, that's your baby, on and on. Who's the baby belong to? So King Solomon said, okay, I have an idea. So he took a sword, and he said, okay, take this sword, cut the baby in half, right? That's the expression, split the baby, and you can split it, right? you'll take half the baby, and you'll take half the baby. And right away, one of the women starts to shout, no, give it to the other one, give it to the other one. Right? So the king said, oh, that's who you give the baby to, right? That's the real mother. A real mother had this compassion for this child, so obviously that's the real mother. So the obvious question is that King Solomon, obviously in this case, like we mentioned before, that he's judging without any procedure over here, right? Usual procedure would you have to bring witnesses, who's the baby, maybe in modern days it would be DNA tests, whatever, but they didn't do any of that. He just did this kind of funny trick, and they took and they made a judgment based on that. And the Torah tells us, right, that it says in Deuteronomy, right, that you should do, the testimony should be 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses at least, right? So for capital punishment, and that you need 2 witnesses also for corporal punishment, and even for even for financial judgments, right? You need witnesses, you need to investigate, like we said earlier, you have to investigate the case, all these things. How come Solomon didn't do that? In fact, the Torah tells us, like we said, right, you need 2 witnesses for even financial crimes or financial civil cases. Maimonides says that a prophet, right, someone who gets his wisdom from God, is not allowed to be involved in a court case, right? You can't say, well, God told me this is the case, right? That's not the way it works. You have to find a judicial process, and you have to go through the whole thing. And you have to go through the Sanhedrin, all the different levels that you have to go through. Now, we even have a story in the Talmud, which I'll just go over briefly, where there was a debate amongst the rabbis about whether a certain thing was ritually pure or ritually impure. And one of the rabbis said, and the law is that we follow majority opinion. And the majority of rabbis, all the rabbis felt that this was one way, and one rabbi felt the other way. And he said, I'm telling you the law is like me. He said, we don't care. We understand this way. And we have to follow the majority. That's what the Torah tells us, follow the majority in this week's Torah portion. So they said, no, we can't follow you, even though you might be very holy and everything. He said, okay, well, I'm going to make he said, if I'm correct, then the river that flows next to the study hall shall flow backwards. And lo and behold, a miracle comes and the river starts to flow backwards. The rabbi said, we don't care. It's really nice. And then he said, well, if I'm correct, then the walls of the study hall should cave in. And they started to cave in, and the rabbis prayed, and they stopped. But tremendous miracle. He said, if I am correct, a voice should come from heaven and say that I'm correct. And sure enough, a voice comes out from heaven that this rabbi is correct. And the rabbis didn't follow him, because the Torah is not in heaven. The Torah is down here. It was given to us to judge. So how could Solomon do such a thing? So we have another story, another similar, another idea that the story is born in the Talmud that we learned last week, or 2 weeks ago, I should say. We had the story of the manna, right? The man that came down and fed the Jewish people for 40 years in the desert. So one time, it says that it says in the Talmud that the man would check the cracks and the crevices. What does that mean, to check the cracks and the crevices? So it says in judgment. So what happened? There was a debate that 2 people were fighting over something. So Moses said, whoever will find his portion of manna at the other guy's house, that one is correct. So sure enough, lo and behold, the next day they come and the manna is at the other guy's house, and he said, okay. They're like, look, Moses said it's going to happen, and that's what happened. But again, similar idea. This was not. How can we decide based on where the manna fell? A civil judgment. The civil judgment has to follow the laws of judgments. So again, a similar idea. This one, obviously, this story is a monetary case, but same idea. So now we're going to go back to what we said earlier. That it says that King Solomon sat on the throne of God. What does it mean that King Solomon sat on the throne of God? So in the Medrash, it explains what happened when Solomon would come to judge the people. That he would come to this throne, and King Solomon had this tremendous throne. We're coming up to Purim soon, and Achashverosh wanted to copy Solomon's throne, and it had this whole intricate, fancy system that when he would stand on it, what happened is this: the different animals that were on the throne would pick him up and put him there, and one of these golden eagles would fly and bring him the Torah. It was a whole big process. So it says that when the witnesses came to testify before King Solomon, the wheels rolled, the oxen bellowed. These are all, by the way, golden animals. These weren't real animals. The lions roared, the bears growled, the sheep bleated, the panthers hissed, the owls hooted, and the cats and pheasants purred, and the roosters crowed, and the hawks and birds chirped. And in order to fluster the witnesses, they would not testify falsely. So witnesses told themselves, we must speak the truth. If not, the world will be destroyed on our account, right? So when they would come, they would see this tremendous throne, and all these animals would start making noises, and they would get so scared they would have no choice but to tell the truth. So we see that when King Solomon judged, he didn't need to have witnesses and counter witnesses and all these different things, because people would say the truth to him. And it says in the Talmud, that somebody a confession is worth 1,000 witnesses, right? 100 witnesses. So obviously, in this case of the case that we brought earlier, right? That when the woman admitted that the child was hers, right? When the woman admitted that she had switched to children, right? So that she felt compelled to tell the truth. And there's another story, that similar idea of being compelled to tell the truth. So there was a woman who was afraid of a ruler in this certain area. So she decided to run away. So she took all her money. She was a very wealthy woman. She took all her money. She took all these gold coins. She packed it into these barrels and filled them with honey. She thought it would be a good idea. So she goes to her neighbor and says, listen, I'm going out of town. This guy is giving me the creeps. I'm getting out of here. So she gives the neighbor, I have barrels of honey. Can you please watch the barrels of honey? No problem. So she goes, the guy is taking care of the honey. And one day he needed some honey. So he said, okay, this woman gave me her honey. I'll replace the honey. He goes, he opens the honey. He sees it's full of coins, right? There's honey, but inside the honey is all these coins. So he empties out all the coins. He fills it up with honey. And the woman eventually comes home and she asks for her barrels back. She opens it up. There's no money. It's all gone. So she goes to the local judge, says, do you have any witnesses? Did you sign a contract? Nope. There's nobody knew that there was money in the barrels. So they said, okay, go to King Saul. She went to King Saul. I can't help you. Go to the Sanhedrin. Went to the Sanhedrin. They said, we can't rule anything because there's no witnesses. It was only in your own heart. We can't see into their heart. So the woman left very distressed. But she's walking down the street and she sees King David, the future King David, who was then a young shepherd. And she says, no one wants to rule for me. Nobody wants to help me. So he said, I'll help you. So, okay. So she brings this young shepherd to King Saul. He says, what do you suggest? He says, bring the barrels. So they bring the barrels, and he says to the man, is this the barrels the woman loaned to you? Yeah, these are the barrels. And he takes the barrel, this empty barrel, and he smashes it, right? And when they see an inside stuck to the inside was these gold coins, right? So right away the man admitted, and he returned all the money. So, and everybody knew that the Spirit of God was with David, and started a whole new chapter of Jewish history. So we see that there's an idea of bringing out something, right? That this bringing out a confession of somebody was this idea that that you don't need witnesses, you don't need to judge in that way. So what is this really all about? Is that these people, Moses, King David, King Solomon, right? They were able to elevate people to a level that was really beyond the justice system, right? That they, instead of saying to somebody, this is the law, this is the situation, we could look at the situation and make a judgment based on what's going on. But in this case, really why the case of King Solomon, right, that all these tremendous miracles happened and these people were just in awe of God, right, that they felt like they had no choice but to tell the truth. They kind of lifted them up, right? And that's really what happened in these cases. And we can connect this also to kind of what happened in last week's Parsha, right, with Yisro, who was Moses' father-in-law, and he comes to the Jewish people and he sees that Moses is busy all day judging the people, right? And Yisro says, this is ridiculous. There's 600,000 men, there's 3 million people, the Torah is brand new. You can't teach every single Jew the Torah, right? One person has a question about the spoon fell into a spoon used with meat, fell into a pot of milk, right? And the next person's coming with a question for a whole tribe, right? This is too much. So he suggests to Moses they should make judges over 10,000 and judges over 1,000, etc., right? And essentially, there would be a system, right? If this person doesn't know the answer, you go to the next higher court. You go to the higher court until if nobody knows the answers, you go to Moses. And Moses doesn't know the answer, you go to God, right? That was the situation. And Moses says, "Great idea," and he accepts the suggestion. And on that day, 78,600 judges were appointed in one day. One day. So obviously Moses was really overwhelmed, right? And I'm sure he was still overwhelmed. He was still Moses full time, right? So why didn't Moses was a smart guy, right? He talks to God, right? So why didn't he come up with this idea? It's a pretty simple idea, right? Create a system. Moses understood that what he was doing was not just giving judgment, but he was lifting people up, right? Like that story with the manna, right? That Moses didn't just tell people, this is the law, goodbye. No, he lifted people up. He made people into better people where the judgment no longer was necessarily relevant, right? So Moses felt he didn't want to take that away until Yisro came and they had no choice, and he felt, okay, I'm going to take the advice, and I'm not going to be able to have that relationship with the Jewish people anymore. But Moses understood that it's not enough that we just make judgments, but also to lift people up. And in our day-to-day life, this is very relevant, right? That when it comes to the way we deal with other people, we deal with our communities, we deal with our children, the way we deal with our neighbors, sometimes we could deal in a way of judgment, right? And say, you did this wrong, this is what we have to do to you. Or we did this, and I have to look at you a certain way. Or another way of dealing with that is that we don't judge people in a literal sense, but we lift them up to a higher level of justice, right? That we create an environment of holiness and positivity, and we create an environment where the good comes out of them and we don't have to necessarily judge them, right? So it's not saying that we're ignoring justice, right? Justice is very important and has its place, right? And it's God's Torah, right? We didn't make it up. It's a real thing, that justice, right? But at the same time, we don't always have to come to that, right? That's always still a last resort. That's the last resort, is that we have to make a thing and say, this is right and this is wrong, and you're on the right side and you're on the wrong side. But ideally, we want to lift people up. We want to create an environment where people on their own, they connect to God and they do the right thing on their own. That's the ideal way, how we deal with others, how we deal with our children, and how we deal with our communities. I want to wish you a good Shabbos. Thank you everybody for joining, and see you next week.